Hi, everyone. Kristen here from Success Street. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are very excited to start our next interview in our series, Success Street Stamp of Approval. So here at Success Street, we provide a variety of services, individual parent and teen coaching services, as well as a variety of online social emotional class options for children. And during this series, we're just sharing, a number of different products and resources, organizations, businesses that we thought would be of help to our families. So we are super excited to introduce Caitlin Kiarie, who is a registered dietitian and founder of Mom N Tot Nutrition. So welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks
We are-
again.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. So why don't you just get started and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I am a registered dietitian. So for anyone listening who might not know exactly what that means, because it is kind of a mouthful, it basically means that I'm a nationally recognized expert in nutrition. And there is a bit of a difference between a dietitian and what we've commonly heard as a nutritionist. And it basically means anyone who's gone on to get the credential as a dietitian has done, a year-long clinical internship, oftentimes working in a hospital setting, and then sitting for board exams to get the credential. Whereas in some ways, a nutritionist could do potentially a weekend seminar and kind of consider themselves to be an expert in the field. So I share that a lot of times when we're doing stuff like this, just to educate the public that when you are really looking for support, ideally you would find a registered dietitian in your community or online, and you can find that very easily by looking for someone who has the RD credential after their name. So that's
Great. That's
a little
helpful to know that. Yeah.
yeah, it's a little bit of background. I got started, as I kind of said, as a dietitian. I did get started in the clinical setting, and I used to work in the hospital for quite a while, and it was a really great experience working alongside the doctors and being a part of the medical team. I learned a tremendous amount. But after a few years, I realized that a lot of the patients I was seeing, they were there because they were sick in some way or had some disease state, and therefore almost forced to see me as a dietitian, right? They kind of had to, in order to be discharged, they had to be seen and educated by the dietitian, or we had to, adjust their diet in the hospital. And you'd be educating someone who maybe has no interest in making any change. And for me, that got hard after a lot of years of working with people who weren't necessarily interested in making change on their own. So that is how Mom N Tot Nutrition slowly began, is that I decided I wanted to work with a population that was interested in working with me, basically, right? The ones who were coming to me for help and support. And I started doing a little bit of private practice right after my clinical work in California. And I was working with adults as well at that time. And a lot of the adults, this is the interesting thing I like to share, is that they were coming to me with a variety of different ailments. Maybe a lot of them are coming for weight loss, maybe for diabetes, high blood pressure, a couple of things. But ultimately, I kept hearing a lot of the same thing come up in sessions, which is these memories that were happening from childhood, right? As of course we all know, right? Everything is from our childhood, our past, everything that we do in our current life is because of our childhood, right? And so it was the same for food and nutrition, is that, if they were coming to me to lose weight, they would tell me about these things that maybe their mom said when they were little, or a coach was trying to get them to bulk up, or whatever it might be. And it was playing a role for them now as an adult, some 30 odd years later, that they've almost been constantly tortured by this mindset around food, right? And it was after a lot of that experience that I realized, pause. What if I were to shift gears here and really work with parents on what their message is to their children, right? What if we can almost, instead of saying get soda out of schools, yeah, that's great and all, but what if from in the home, we as parents could do a better job at the message we're giving kids and the role modeling that's happening? Because from what I was seeing in adulthood, those were the biggest players. It wasn't about the soda in the school that was causing, this person in their maybe 40s to have high blood pressure or, overweight or whatever. It was this mindset that was unhealthy relationship with food, and that had been created in childhood. So that's where Mom N Tot Nutrition began.
That's awesome. That is, that's such a great background story. And I think, you definitely hit the nail on the head. It's so important to it's almost like you're addressing the root,
Yeah. Yes.
not just
Right.
kind of
Right.
trying to be reactive to what's coming your way. So that's excellent.
Exactly.
So yeah, so what really, I guess inspired you then to like move into Mom and Tot Nutrition? So like why
Yeah.
did you focus on
So while I knew that I wanted to then shift and start working with parents, it wasn't actually until I became a parent myself. And so I'd already had this interest, right? But then when I became a parent myself, and I was at a couple of groups early on with my firstborn son, groups like, Mommy and Me Yoga, or a breastfeeding support group, or these types of things. And the other moms were very anxious about feeding themselves or feeding their babies. They had thousands of questions, all the were like, I don't know, am I eating the wrong thing? Is my baby gassy because I had beans last night? Or, I still haven't lost the baby weight and I don't know if it's something I'm eating or what I should be restricting. It was just constant. And then, then the baby was going to start eating. And now there was even more questions, right? Like, do I give rice cereal, or what's this new baby-led weaning thing? So the point is that there was so much uncertainty and anxiety in all of these parents that was the main driving force when I said okay, I can answer all of these questions for you here in support group. And I constantly I was like, oh, I know about that. I know about, I'm actually trained in that. I can tell you all about that, And one of the owners of a local place here in Montclair had said, would you teach a workshop on that? You obviously have all the content in the background and the credential. Would you teach on that? And that's when I decided, yeah, I would love to be able to help these moms not feel so anxious. And that has been my driving force since day one, is that my goal is to help moms just take a deep breath and go about feeding themselves and their children without the anxiety behind it. If that means that they need just a little bit of education to do so, if they need someone to hold their hand to do so, whatever it is that I can do to make it feel more peaceful and happy at mealtimes, that's my goal.
That's great. So in terms of the services that you offer for these,
Yeah.
so how do you work with families? What services do you have?
So I have basically group workshops or private counseling. So it really breaks down into two of those. My group workshops have always been on a live format, although these days are all virtual. And hopefully soon will be maybe a combination of both virtual and live in person. And the group workshops are really a great place for parents to, first of all, realize that they're not alone in the struggle that they're having in feeding their baby, their toddler, their teen. It doesn't matter the age. We need to sometimes be reminded that oh yeah, my kid does that same thing, right? It's not just me. And also sometimes there'll be a parent that'll ask a question that maybe you didn't have that problem yet, or you hadn't thought of that question. And so you then gain so much from somebody else's participation. So these group workshops, in my opinion, are really amazing for that format, right? That they can learn from one another and feel the support of one another. And I feel that there's a lot of camaraderie in these groups when we do them in that format. And then the only problem is sometimes we're not going to be as specific, right? If someone's really has a challenging situation, I can't needle down and help them pinpoint the root of that problem in a group workshop. And so that's where I work with families on a one-to-one basis, on a private counseling basis. And it's been really great because it's amazing to me sometimes where you can give the basic education in a group workshop and not realize all of these kind of hidden struggles that a family's having until you really get into their world. And so oftentimes I'll even do home visits. And when I walk into a home and sit down and we kind of get started, there's all these little tiny things that I can pick up just from being in the home, right? For example, something as small as, I noticed that the high chair is kind of offset from the main table, right? Something basic like that when feeding a baby that I wouldn't have known to ask maybe if we were doing a virtual session or, something like that. Or, with an older kid, I'll notice that they often sit at the counter and the TV's behind them. And they're often, watching the TV when they're eating. And so there's these little tiny nuances that I can pick up when we're doing private work in a parent's home that I can help them just course correct ever so slightly. And we have very big differences when we do that.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and it's interesting you say that too. I think that, and it's important for families to know what we see, and even in my own home, that your needs do shift and change over time, right? So how we have 3 in our house, and so how it was with the first eating habits and all of that is very different with the third, who's shuffled around to all the activities and maybe we're not sitting down for dinner together. And so there's always, I think, a need for that kind of support. No matter how experienced you are as a mom, we're all kind of going through those struggles. And
yes, and we have to relearn, as you said, right? You don't always feed the third the way that you fed the first, for better or worse. I actually have a lot of times where parents will come to my workshop, my baby's first foods workshop, and they'll be a third time parent. They're on their third kid, and they'll say, "I'm here because I don't want my third baby to eat the way my first two
First one.
did. Yeah, like almost like this is a
They
do-over for
learned their
me.
lesson. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. And the truth is, this is for all of us, myself included. You don't know what you don't know. So I think when it comes to food, we think we can feed children without necessarily having to learn anything because we eat 3 times a day, right, or more. And we were fed as children, and so we just kind of feel like this is something that we don't really need to like take time to learn about, that we could just kind of go and feed them and be fine. And truthfully, what ends up happening for not everyone, but for a lot of parents, is that they get to a place that they didn't mean to get to. They get down a path. And I can't tell you if I had a quarter for every time someone said to me, I swore I'd never be the parent.
You just don't know how, one day you realize you're there and you're like, I don't know how I got here.
Exactly. I don't know how I got there. And you know, there's no blame for that, right? Because I think it's our society, if anything, to blame, that doesn't almost like teach parents from the very beginning, like, you're not supposed to know how to avoid that. This is a class, or these things are important for us to learn, for everyone to learn. You're not meant to know how to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the same way how it's almost become socially acceptable for us to take a birthing class, right? Like some kind of birthing class. People will take Lamaze, they'll take hypnobirthing, they'll take Bradley method, there's like various forms, or maybe they'll just even take like a 2-hour workshop on, you know, in the hospital. But everybody's taken a birthing workshop for the most part, right? So we've gotten it through our heads as parents that we need to learn how to birth.
Yeah.
Except for that's one day.
Yeah. What about the rest?
Right. And
it's true, like between sleeping and eating and just behavior and tantrums. I mean, there's so much to learn.
There's so much. Yep.
You know,
I always say you birth them for a day, but you feed them for 18 years. Which one do you think maybe you should take more classes on?
So true. That's so true.
Not that birthing classes are not important. Let me just go on record and say that has also super valuable.
But all of it's important.
Yeah, all of it's important. Learning about sleep, learning about behavior, learning about all of these things, you know. Yeah. For sure. When you know better, you do better, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so what do you hope that your clients, when they work with you, like what do you hope that they will get from that experience, or that they'll learn, their takeaway?
Yeah, I think maybe my most important message that I want parents to realize is how valuable their words and actions are to how their children will eat. So what I mean by that is you have to almost like, you know, walk the walk and not talk the talk. That's first things first when feeding children. Oftentimes parents will not necessarily be together for meals and, you know, feeding their children something different from themselves. And there's kind of all of these things that's so common. But if we're not sitting and eating with them, not every meal, but, you know, enough of them to role model the behavior. And if we're not eating the same food to role model that behavior, you know, it becomes really hard for our kids to do something that we're not already doing. Right. So I think my biggest message is for parents to kind of reflect a little bit. If you're struggling with your child's eating, I'm not at all saying it's your fault. I'm simply asking you to reflect to see what could we change potentially to better role model the behavior we're hoping to see from our child.
Right.
And realize too that there might be something from your childhood, right? So as parents, we've all had a childhood, and we bring that baggage, quote unquote, to the table when we feed our kids, right? So I actually had taught a workshop for a while and was using the slogan, like, what are you really bringing to the table, right? So like, you're not just bringing the food, you're bringing your whole past relationship with food to the table when you feed your kid, right? So if when you were little, you had to clean your plate, or if you were little and you were picky, or for whatever, or you're worried because in your family history, there's like heart disease or diabetes, and you think your kid's going to eat too much sugar and have that diabetes too. Like all of these things that are going through your mind are showing up at the dinner table.
Right.
And you might not realize that this might be a subconscious thing that's kind of playing out for you. So I hope my clients gain from me this I don't know, this perspective of thinking about what are they actually bringing to the table and what are they doing, because a lot of times children will be picking up on those subtleties that we don't even know are happening.
Right. Yeah. Self-awareness is a big one for sure.
Yeah. And that's the hardest one for us, isn't it?
It is.
Right? Yeah. Which is why sometimes we need somebody else to
help
show.
us.
Yes.
We always need others to help us.
That's why therapists have therapists, right?
100%.
Yep.
That's great. So is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up?
Just that it's never too late, which I might sound cliche, but I do often have parents, maybe have a little older kids that will ask me like, "Oh, it's too late, they have such bad habits." And if I can help an adult at 40 or 50 years old to
Right.
change their habits, then your teen or tween is not too late. It's never too late for us to course redirect. And to say, if they're an older kid, you might have to have that conversation. Whereas with a 2-year old, you course direct, you don't need to talk about it, right? But with a 12-year-old, there might be a minute that you have to sit down and say, I've realized that I want to do things differently, depending upon the topic. I have clients potentially say, I realized that I wasn't giving you full power over, your hunger and satiety, or I was controlling some things that maybe are more your responsibility, or whatever it is, basically having this dialogue about how things might start to shift.
Mhm.
And I think kids learn from that, right? They learn that, oh, like my parent learned something different or new, and now they're going to do something different. And I think that's a valuable lesson for them to learn. But don't give up. Don't accept that, oh, my kid's a bad eater. And so it just, maybe they'll grow out of it one day,
Absolutely. Yeah. No,
you
that and
know?
that's such an important point because I think sometimes parents may feel that way, right? When they have older kids and that's such an important point that, right? So adults can manage to change their behavior and get help, then there's
Yes.
no reason to not go.
Why an
Yeah.
older kid couldn't do the same thing. Yeah. And parents, I want to say, like, you deserve happy meals, right? Like, you deserve to have enjoyable mealtime experiences. And so if you're like dreading dinner on a regular basis, as I hear from so many of my clients, I just feel like it's not fair to you. Like, let me help you not dread dinner every night, because I want you to enjoy that family time. We know, aside from nutrition,
Yeah.
that the family meal is, and it doesn't have to be dinner for everyone's, schedule, who's thinking, I can't do dinner time, right? That's fine. It can be breakfast. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be dinner, right? But that so much happens when we come together over food at the table that is outside of nutrition. And so if you're coming to the table, but you're pissed about it, right? Or you're like already expecting this to be hard, we're going to get in the way of all those benefits that happen at the family meal.
Absolutely. Yeah. We often talk about that with our families as well. Just the importance of having that meal, whether, like you said, it doesn't have to be dinner, it could be
Mhm.
breakfast, but having that time to be enjoyable and to get those many benefits,
Yes.
that
Yes.
are from family meals. And so it's
Yeah.
wonderful that you provide this service and can work with families, because this is definitely an area of struggle that we hear pretty often with the families that we work with too. And so,
Yeah. I
um,
do think perhaps it might becoming a more prevalent problem as our society overemphasizes healthy food, right? So, of course, as a dietitian, I'm not going to tell you that we shouldn't eat healthy foods, but I think we're almost coming a little bit too
to
far. Yeah,
the
yeah,
extreme,
we've come
right?
exactly. We're kind of coming past to an extreme where we feel immense guilt if our kid is eating cookies, right? Or immense anxiety if they're not eating broccoli. And I don't think in 20, 30 years ago, parents felt those extreme emotions
No.
over food. Yeah. And
Yeah,
so the
it's
fact that we do now, I think that actually makes our kids eat worse, not better, right? Like, our those feelings that we have, that extreme guilt or anxiety, like,
right.
that's making them be a worse eater, not a better eater. So it's almost like we create this cycle, right? Like, I'm worried about their eating, my worrying makes them eat worse, then I get more worried because they're
Right.
eating worse, and around we go.
Right. So you can kind of help them get off of that.
Get off the worry cycle.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Oh, well, that is so great. Thank you so much. This is
You're welcome.
really, really helpful. And so, we hope that everyone found this information helpful. And we will be posting this video and all this information about Caitlin and her services with Mom and Tot Nutrition. So we hope that you will check her out. And thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.